In the United States, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she will move ahead with efforts to impeach President Trump for a second time, even though he has just 9 days left in office. Democrats are divided over how to censure Trump for encouraging the mob that stormed the US Capitol last week, leaving 4 protesters and a policeman dead. Impeachment will take time, and it risks consuming President-elect Joe Biden's first weeks in office. Vice President Mike Pence shows no sign of invoking the 25th Amendment to force Trump out immediately. Our reporter Colin Campbell is following events in Washington, D.C., and he says Democrats want to impeach the president to prevent him from running for office again.
Now, there is a step between an impeachment and him not being allowed to run for office, but House Democrats say this would be the next step in putting the nail in that coffin to ensure that we would not see a rise of President Donald Trump again, or a re-election campaign for the president coming again. And I think this is what House Democrats really want to nail home, is that this is something that happened last week that is inexcusable, and that there has to be a penalty for what the president seemed to have encouraged. And even though this may take several days to do, and this is not something that the Senate will most likely confirm, it does put it on record, and it does prevent the president from assuming public office after this.
There are some concerns, Colin, that pursuing this impeachment could even further polarize the nation. Does it have the support of some Republicans?
It does. And what we're looking at here is a new dynamic, whereas before there was an impeachment that seemed mostly and largely partisan because of the suggestions of Russian collusion and other relationships that the president had with Russians. This one, we are seeing a lame duck president. We're seeing a massive resignations from the White House. And then we're also seeing the outrage, that is the fallout coming from the riot on Capitol Hill. Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania is working with Republicans like Lisa Murkowski to talk about why they would like to see the president removed from office.
The best way for our country, Chuck, is for the president to resign and go away as soon as possible. I acknowledge that may not be likely, but I think that would be best. It does not look as though there is the will or the consensus to exercise the 25th Amendment option. And I don't think there's time to do an impeachment. There's 10 days left before the president leaves anyway. I think the best thing would be a resignation.
It's very assured that the president will not readily step down on his own unless he faces real intense pressure. And it doesn't seem like that's happening with the president right now. It doesn't seem like Vice President Mike Pence would like to invoke the 25th Amendment either. And that's why we're seeing that large movement in the House to get him impeached. Rosie?
Former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger has issued a powerful condemnation of the Capitol assault, and one of his fellow Republicans who've enabled President Trump. The Hollywood actor was born in Europe just after World War II, and he's warned that he's seen firsthand how things can spin out of control.
Now, I grew up in Austria. I'm very aware of Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. It was a night of rampage against the Jews carried out in 1938 by the Nazi equivalent of the Proud Boys. Wednesday was the day of broken glass right here in the United States. The broken glass was in the windows of the United States Capitol. But the mob did not just shatter the windows of the Capitol. They shattered the ideals we took for granted. They did not just break down the doors of the building that housed the American democracy. They trampled the very principles on which our country was founded.
Scott Lucas is a professor of international politics at the University of Birmingham and co-founder of the America Unfiltered project. He says there are now 2 factions vying for power within the Republican Party.
There's one faction, let's call them the establishment Republicans, who play by the rules. Even if they disagree with the Democrats, think of the top Senate Republican, Mitch McConnell. They still follow the procedures of government. They still respect the decisions of courts, of Congress itself. Then there's another faction who are the Trumpists. And the Trumpists, like the president, don't really play by the rules. They don't believe, for example, that the election was binding. They don't believe in the power of the courts necessarily. They don't even believe in Congress at times if it rules against their men in the White House. And remember, those Trumpists, 6 of them, senators and 121 representatives, more than 60% of the Republican membership of the House, still voted after the violence, after the turmoil, after the deaths on Wednesday, to go along with Donald Trump in refusing to recognize President-elect Joe Biden. They include figures like Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who ran for the presidency in 2016 and would like to do so in 2024. So well after Donald Trump leaves office, and as he struggles to have some influence, that story of the divide in the Republican Party and the consequences for the U.S. system is going to be one of the leading ones in 2021.
What do you make of the comparison that we just heard there from Schwarzenegger to what happened at the Capitol, to what happened to the night of broken glass under German rule, the Nazi rule? Is that a fair comparison?
Well, I'm always careful not to reach for Nazi Germany because it is so emotive. But I watched that full video from Schwarzenegger, and it is incredibly powerful because it's not just talking about the night of broken glass. He's talking about how Nazism led to World War II, and he's talking about the consequences in his home country, Austria, and others afterwards, that emotional shock. And what he's saying is that people, not because they were necessarily all evil, but because they wanted to believe in something, were led by evil people who incited hate and who incited violence. So without using the word Nazi Germany, what I would say is in 2021, that the danger of following those who incite hate, incite violence, has been seen in the past week. And the danger of walking over your system, of saying that the rules don't matter, that the courts don't matter, that the legislators don't matter, we've seen that not only for the past week, we've seen it for years in the United States. I'm hopeful we'll have a better 2021, but this is the most important period in American history since the U.S. Civil War.
When we talk about what's important, how important is it that, as Nancy Pelosi said, that the Democrats pursue this line of impeachment? Because there have been some calls for Congress to say, you know, just let it go. Let's try and let a nation heal. There's 9 days left. What do you make of that?
Well, I think at the very least, Trump should be censured, which is not quite as serious as impeachment for what he's done. However, even though we know that there will be no trial by January 20th, because the Senate Republican Mitch McConnell will not allow it, impeachment serves 3 purposes. First, symbolically, it draws a line. This is the first time a president will be charged with incitement of violence in U.S. history. And this impeachment says, we can't let this happen again. Secondly, it sends a practical message to U.S. agencies who are dealing with an unstable Trump, which is make sure he does not do anything rash, contain him in the last 10 days. For example, Pelosi asked the top military representative, General Mark Milley, don't let him start a war. And thirdly, it's a reach out by Democrats to some of the Republicans that Colin, your correspondent, was talking about, which is, look, we know your party's split, but we need to agree beyond Democratic and Republican that there are lines to be drawn. We need to get back to what is acceptable and unacceptable in politics. For all those reasons, even though we may see a trial of Donald Trump not in the next 10 days, but in the spring or summer, because it would strip him of the perks of having been a president, I think it is an important move.